Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to my weekly live chat. I'm excited to spend a little bit of time with you talking about one of my favorite things, quilting. And today we're going to kind of recap a video that just came out on Tuesday about quilting feathers, which is my favorite design ever. As always, I have Jessica behind the camera monitoring the chat. So if you're watching live and you have some questions, be sure to type them out there and she will hand those to me at the end. Normally, if you haven't joined a live chat before, normally I talk about something quilting related. Usually it's something that somebody has requested from the type chat before we go live. But over the last couple weeks and upcoming, we're going to be recapping the Free Motion Challenge quilting along video series that we're in the middle of. So if you haven't heard, I'm in the middle of that video series where we're learning how to quilt feathers, and we're talking about how to quilt them in all areas of our quilts. And usually what I do during the series is we'll have a video come out on Tuesday, and then on Thursday I go live, answer your questions about the video or anything quilting related in general, and just kind of recap, maybe give some pointers that I didn't talk about in the video or show you some examples, just kind of a little bit of additional help on that. So it's just kind of a fun way to, I don't know, connect. It makes the videos feel a little bit more like a class and not so much like I'm just putting the videos out there into the void. So let's get right onto it. So like I said, we're talking about feathers, and these Free Motion Challenge quilting along video series, they're always on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't had a chance to join in yet, no worries, it'll be on there. You can also check out previous video series. And I try to tailor the designs so that whether you're a beginner quilter, whether you're an experienced quilter, you'll kind of hopefully come away with some stuff. So this is the class panel that we're working on, and so far we've kind of talked about the basics of feathers, kind of like how to quilt them. And this is the first time we've actually started, this video was the first time we kind of worked on the panel. And what we kind of talked about was quilting in thinner borders or strips, kind of like sashings. I want to show you some of my favorite designs for those thinner areas. When I'm looking at a quilt and I'm trying to decide what to quilt in it, usually the first question I ask myself is this big enough for a feather or not? That's kind of like the deciding factor. And the fact of the matter is not every area is going to be big enough for our feathers. Feathers need some room to grow and they need, a lot of space, but you can pull out some of the elements of a feather and use them to create designs for those thinner borders and sashings. So it was kind of fun to, for me to like kind of plan out what I wanted to show you and the designs we wanted to talk through. So in the video that came out on Tuesday, I showed 5 different designs. You got to know that there's a million different feather designs out there that you can play with. So hopefully some of these techniques you can pull out and use. But one thing I didn't really say in the video, and I wish I would have kind of reiterated this, not every design is for every quilter. So don't feel like you have to watch the video and master all 5 designs. That's not the point. The point is that maybe you see a design or two that you think you might like to learn and practice either on your panel or on your quilt sandwich. So hopefully it wasn't overwhelming to you. I know sometimes I get really excited about the quilting designs and I throw a lot of content in a video. I know it can be overwhelming, but I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I think of it as a buffet of design options and you get to pick the ones you want to use. As far as the designs that I chose, I tried to find ones that kind of had a range of skill levels and different ways to change them up, because I love creating variations of the designs that we learn. So the designs that we kind of talked through are really designs that are perfect. I said a lot, narrow borders or sashings. Really, I'm kind of talking about 2 to 3 inch areas or strips, or maybe even up to 4 inches. Once it gets a little bit bigger than that, you get to your 5-inch areas, and then you can probably just quilt a feather in there. So those thinner areas, kind of what I was talking about. Now, not always, but sometimes I get a wild hair and I release a bonus video. So yesterday there was a second video that came out that showed how to use these designs around corners. After I finished the first video, I got to thinking, well, I mean, on our panel, we're not necessarily turning corners, but you will definitely want to know that when you're working on your quilts. So if you haven't already watched that, I'll show you some pictures from it, but we did talk about that in another video. So with the 5 designs that we worked with, I'm just going to kind of go through them real quick. Some of them I had some quilted examples that I've used over the years, some other options. But the first one was the half feather, where I'm just quilting one side of my feather using that seam as my spine and quilting those petals so that they extend from that. This is by far the most common way that I use any of these designs. So out of all 5 of the designs we learned in this video, this is the one I use a lot because it works great in 1-inch borders. You can use any kind of feather with it. Here you can see on the left we have that more classic feather that has that half heart shape, whereas on the right we have that custom feather that we learned that have the petals that kind of stack on top of each other. works great on both of those. It's just a great way to use that feather in those areas, and especially if I have a sashing or a strip that surrounds a block, because it kind of gives it a framed effect. So one thing I didn't say in the video is you can kind of pick and choose which side of the strip that you're quilting these feathers, because the seam that those feathers extend from is the one that's going to kind of draw attention to. So I want to make sure I'm putting this around elements that I like. But in this example, I didn't quilt my petals so that they go all the way to the edge of the area. Instead, I stopped about a ½ inch short and then used a filler in the rest of that. This didn't make its way into the tutorial just because, I mean, by the time there was 20 minutes, I was like, I got to cut some of this stuff out. But this is a great example of how you handle it if the petals don't quite reach. Anytime you have a gap in your quilting, whether it's between the design itself or between the design and the edge of the area, use echoing, use a filler design to fill it in. And here I have 2 different strips, but I kind of pulled them together by quilting my petals so they come together in the center. So especially if I have blocks with lots of strips, it's just kind of a fun way to kind of group different pieces together. Again, you can use this to draw attention to whatever it's wrapping around, whether that's a border around a block. Especially in this example, I have a piece block from last year's Build-A-Quilt, and this particular block had a sashing around it. So in this example, it's not necessarily a sashing, but it is kind of a border to the block. So you can definitely use it in those areas as well. Every time I kind of prepare the live chat, I kind of go down the rabbit hole of past quilted pictures and try to find examples. I love showing these designs in other quilts just because it kind of shows you, I don't know, some more examples, gives you some more visuals of it. But here we can see there's that half feather shape wrapping around that, really focal print in the center. And even though it's not a square, it's, this different octagon, I think, yes, it can still wrap around it. So you can use it in a lot of different ways. Here I just found another picture of a quilt that had lots of strips where I just kind of alternated between designs, where you can kind of see those used. Now, when we talked about turning the corners in that second video that came out yesterday, this is one example where we're going to pivot around that border corner. So the design kind of pivots and then changes direction. The hardest thing about learning a design is learning how to quilt it, and then learning how to quilt it in a lot of different directions. So in this example, I've quilted it, vertically and then horizontally. That's something that's going to come with practice. So try not to get discouraged if one direction seems kind of tricky for you. On a sewing machine, you have the option of changing the orientation of your quilt. So definitely do that to make it easier for you to work with. For those of you that are quilting on a long arm, we don't really have that option, right? We have to learn it in all different directions. If that's the case, I suggest practicing one direction over and over again until it clicks, and then try quilting it in a lot of different directions. It's going to make it a little bit more manageable and not like you're just confusing yourself right off the bat. And I especially love this design when it wraps all the way around an element. I think it's just so beautiful. It just kind of gives it that framed effect and really shows off whatever it's wrapped around. And the great thing is, if you're struggling with quilting both sides of the feather, well, we're just going to quilt one. And sometimes, for some quilters, having a defined area to fill in might be a little easier. So don't look at any of the designs and think, oh, that must be trickier because it's in a strip. That's not necessarily the case. Some quilters tend to do better with wide open spaces, and some of us tend to do better with defined areas. And if you find that that's you, learning designs in borders or strips are going to help you learn how it goes together. Okay, second, we saw the heart feather. And so in this example, we're just quilting our petals, but we're alternating directions, kind of quilting a heart shape that never quite meets up. This is going to be fun and fast, and the reason I included it is because most of us have drawn or doodled a heart sometime in our life, and most of quilting is just knowing where you're going. And so already having an idea of how that shape goes together makes it a little easier. Now, the tricky thing with this design is, for the first time, we're seeing a mirror image. So I'm quilting one side and then quilting the other and flipping back and forth, which we're going to see again. If you find that you're struggling with that, just know that that's just normal. Our brain does better on one side than the other. It will click. You'll definitely get it. But this is nice and fun. It leaves out the spine, so we don't have the spine in between those petals, making it a little bit quicker to quilt, so that when I start from one end of my strip, I end up on the other side, which is really great if I'm wanting to work my way around a block. And then we can see in the bottom right corner, turning the corner with this design. So in that bonus video, I said, we can pivot around the corner. This particular one, we're going to change direction where we just quilt all the way up to the edge and then quilt our next one the next way. So just kind of, instead of looking at that corner as a separate thing, we're just kind of running it right off. And you can kind of see this example right here where I've kind of took the quilted example and drew and marked over it. Now, if you got the expanded resource PDF, these illustrations are in that PDF. For those of you who don't, you can kind of see it right here. But when you're turning the corner, which isn't necessarily anything you have to do on this panel, but when you're turning the corner, try not to let it freak you out. Just kind of get up to the edge and then continue on in the next direction, knowing that it's going to be a little different in that corner. It has to be, right? Because we're bending that design around. But as long as everything's filled in, it's going to look great. All right, the next one we saw were the flipped feathers. Now, this one uses the custom feather petal. That's that one where we build off of the bottom with that little bitty bit of backtracking, but it's changing direction. And honestly, this one of all of them is one I probably struggled with the most when I was learning how to quilt, because I'm quilting a few in one direction and then flipping it around to the other. But once you get the hang of doing both directions, you can really come up with some cool variations, and you can see some different examples here where I've changed the shape of the petal, where I've added some swirls in, just kind of having fun creating those different shapes. The reason I like this design is instead of drawing attention to one side of the sashing or the other, it just kind of is a self-contained design. So this is something I might use in a sashing between blocks when I don't want one block to stand out over the other, just because it kind of, since it alternates direction, it doesn't draw your eye to one way or the other. And like I said, you can really play around with this and come up with your different variations. When you're turning the corner with this, though, don't feel like you have to, end on the same number of petals that you did when you were working your way along the strip. It's just get it close and then move on. And this particular one, I did the same thing that we saw with the previous one, where I quilted it all the way up to the edge and then changed directions. You can kind of see those examples right there. If you're struggling with this one, the switching back and forth, as you're quilting, stop and take a second and kind of trace out the next couple of steps with your fingertips. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it'll help you visualize the path, and your brain can kind of like, okay, that's where I need to go and how I need to work my way on it. Now, the next one that we learned was the scooped feathers. So again, with the switching directions, except instead of using that custom feather petal, we did the more classic feather petal, which has that kind of half-heart shape. That's the one that we talked a lot about making it merge into the spine. If you haven't already saw that video from 2 weeks ago or from last week, be sure to check it out because I talk a lot more about it. In this example, this particular design, we're using our quilting to kind of carve out a scoop or an arc area and then filling it in with petals before moving on. So again, we have that change, that mirror image, which I'm sorry if you were struggling with that and hating me for it. I promise it comes pretty quickly with a little bit of practice. But what I love about it is it takes a different shape of petal. So if you kind of gravitate more to that classic feather, then you might like this better. If you are more of the custom feather, then the previous one might be the one for you. Like I've already said, you don't have to do all the designs that we're working through. You can kind of pick and choose the ones you want to use. But here you can see a couple examples. One where I replaced some of those petals with a swirl, a little bit of echoing on the side of the area, especially if it's a little too big. And then one where we just kind of left out the echoing around the outside. And then we can see how to turn the corner with that as well. So I like how this can kind of look ferny a little bit, like a fern or a feather. Like obviously a feather, but kind of like a little bit of a different look to that feather. Now, one thing I didn't say, I don't think I said it in the video, is when I'm quilting for these videos, I use contrasting threads so you can see the quilting. That's kind of the whole point. But if I were actually quilting this on a quilt, I would pick a thread color that blended in or wasn't so contrasting with the quilting, with the fabric. Now, this design can actually be used kind of like a fern with a pointier shape. So in that bright green kind of border that's right next to that navy, you can see that kind of ferny shape. That was quilted the same exact way. The only difference is instead of quilting curvy petals, I quilted pointy petals. So if you want something that looks more nature inspired, something that looks more like a fern or kelp or anything like that, then that could be a good option for you. Or maybe you're just struggling with that half-heart shape. You can totally leave it out and just do that kind of pointier fern look. So again, a lot of different ways that you can change it up. Now in the video, no, sorry, in a future video, we're going to see how to use this scooped feather again. We're going to see it again in borders. This is just kind of a tease. We're going to see how to use it in bigger borders and how we can quilt it on a diagonal to fill in those areas. So these designs that we're talking through can be used in a lot of different areas. They don't have to just be in those skinnier borders or sashings. So just know that once you get comfortable quilting it, then hopefully you can use your imagination to think of all the different places that you can put those on your quilts. And then another example of turning the corner. When I'm quilting all the way up to the edge, I'm not worried about which side I'm ending on. I'm just quilting those until I run out of room and then changing direction. And so in this quilted example, I've kind of ended where those petals in the corner are kind of facing the outer corner, whereas on the previous picture, they were facing the other direction. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to fill it in and then move on into the next direction. All right, and then lastly, we talked through mini feathers, which, to be honest, I wasn't sure if this is really a design. Basically, we're taking the feather that we've already learned and shrinking it down to fill in those areas. This is going to be for more like a 3 to 4 inch border. I'm not going to try to fit this in those 2-inch borders. I'll go a little bit insane. But basically, we're quilting it on a much smaller scale. I won't say much smaller, on a slightly smaller scale. How about that? A couple things I'm doing differently, though, is if I'm limited on space, I'm going to take out the echoed spine. Normally, when I quilt my feathers, I love that echoed spine because it just kind of separates the two sides. But in this example, don't have quite enough room. And so taking that out just gives me a little bit more room for my petals. And so we saw how you can quilt your spine down the center of your area and how you can alternate direction as you work your way back up to the top. This is just a different example of how you can quilt the feathers. You don't have to go about this way. If you wanted, you could quilt all of one side and then come back and do the other. But in this example, since I'm leaving out that echoed spine, it's no problem to switch back and forth. What I love about quilting, though, is that you can take it and adapt it for whatever your preferences are. So the reason I throw out a bunch of these different examples is just so that maybe you find one that works for you. Perhaps you do better doing one side and then coming to the other. Maybe you do better at flipping back and forth. Both of them are totally fine. I also showed in the video how you can leave the spine out altogether and just quilt your petals. It's not trickier, but it might be a little bit harder if you're used to using that spine as a guide. But in that example, maybe I want to start from one part and end on the opposite side. So the thing to remember here is that you can change up how you quilt them to make them fit your preferences. And like all the other designs we learned, you can change them up by changing the shape of those petals, by throwing in different shapes and details. And I love doing this because I just think it's kind of fun. Now, this is one of the techniques that works with both kinds of feathers. So you can do this with the classic or the custom feather, totally up to you. But here you can kind of see from the class panel, the quilting on there. So there's my one spine, no echoed lines, trying to fill in that space as much as possible. Now, this is something I've talked about before, especially if you watched previous live chats where I talked about how I quilted this quilt for Tula Pink. This particular quilt had really long sashings, obviously, around the blocks, but they weren't quite big enough for an ornate feather. So in this example, I kind of shrunk down that mini feather and quilted it here. So perfect example of where I might use that design in between blocks when I want to add just that kind of beautiful framing effect. And here's a little bit closer look of it. Closer look. You can kind of see those pretty petals in there. So have fun with it. Try to switch it up, or if you're like, I'm just trying to breathe, Angela, and quilt, then you don't have to switch it up, but it's kind of a fun idea to change up those petals shapes. For this particular one, turning the corner means I'm going to wrap it around. So I'm taking that design and I'm trying to quilt it so that it bends around that shape. And that can be a little tricky at first, but what finally helped me kind of help it click in my mind is on the inner side where there's less room, my petals are going to lay on top of each other. On the outer corner where there's more room, those petals are going to be bigger and they need to take up more space. And it's okay if it looks different in the corner. It has to, because there's more room in that corner than there is on the sides. So as long as everything fills in the area, it's going to be fine. And I'm sure if you've watched the videos, you've heard me already say that about 20 million times. So whether you try that kind of basic half feather, you go with a heart, or you try the ones that change directions, my goal is for the video that you find one or two that you want to practice and kind of perfect on your quilts, because they really all are versatile and great to use in so many different ways. Now, I already kind of alluded to this, but if you haven't already checked out the free quilting diagrams, be sure to do that, because I have examples of the designs that we're learning, especially if you're struggling with a design, because you can trace over those diagrams to help it click. When I say drawing out the designs, I'm not talking about improving your drawing skills. That's not the thing. It's just helping your brain learn the path and how that goes together. But I also have expanded resource PDFs, so even more pages, over 30 pages of step-by-step diagrams, more instructions, more quilted examples. A great question came up in the type chat before I went live, and it was, if you get the free quilting diagrams, do you need to print those off if you get the expanded resource? And you don't. The expanded resource has the free stuff in there too, so it's just everything the free has and then extra. So I thought that was a good question that came up. But if you just need a little more help with the designs, you can check it out. For less than $10, you have everything that you need to be successful with it. And I know for me personally, I love a printed thing right next to me. I don't know if that's because I'm old school, but I like to be able to have it right next to me as I'm quilting. Now, next week, we're going to talk about feathers in blocks. Now, this is such a fun one to film because there's a million ways to make quilt blocks, right? So we're going to talk about how to quilt feathers in bigger blocks, how to quilt feathers in smaller sections, and even kind of how to highlight around a block. So I'm excited for that, and that will be out on Tuesday. And again, if you're watching and you're like, I don't really know what you're talking about, you can check out our website, quiltingismytherapy.com. We have more about this challenge and as well as previous challenges. So a lot of content on there if you want to join us. So a lot of fun. Drink break. All right, so, sorry, I'm cutting out dry. There was one comment that came out in the type chat. So normally before I go live, I get on the video and kind of type and chat with everybody. It's a lot of fun. So if you are free half an hour before the live chat, I hope you'll join us. Somebody mentioned they love the one-sided feather because they can't seem to make a pretty two-sided feather. That is 100% normal. I mean, I feel like almost every quilter that I've ever taught has struggled with that, where one side starts looking good and the other side looks like you forgot everything that you did before. And I really think that's because our brains have a dominant side. Instead of being discouraged, think of it as you're almost there. You've got half of it down. You just have to kind of learn that other side. And it doesn't take as long as you might think. So hopefully, if you're struggling with that, you're not going to feel discouraged and worried about it. All right, how about questions? Let's see if we have any questions that come up. Now, I do have some bad news. I'm not going to be here for any live chats for the next 4 weeks. It's going to be probably the beginning of September before I'm back. I'm going to be out of town, but I will be monitoring the videos, answering questions that you have, and then I'll be back and we'll recap the whole series. So I will miss you guys, but I'll be out of town. It'll be fun. I'm having an issue turning corners with the classic feathers. My petals get upside down and distorted with the basic feather. So totally normal. So what happens is as you're quilting, sometimes you forget, oh crap, where am I going? So before you start, I kind of do this with my hands, being really aware of which direction your petals are going as you head into that curve is going to help you remember which way to go. So if I'm going from let's say the curvy part down, right? That means my down is going to be aiming in the direction I'm going. So just being aware of that's going to help keep me on the right track. If you find that your petals are flipping around, it could be because at some point you forgot to merge that petal into the spine. So what you might find helpful is quilt your border strip, but as you approach that corner, stop and maybe mark out that corner. Mark out where the spine's going to go, mark out where you want those petals to go, and then quilt. That will give you that visual and help get you on the right track. When it comes to marking out designs, you can mark out everything if you want, or you can just mark out the sections that you're struggling with. And when I do that, I like to, wait till I get there, mark it, and then go ahead and quilt it right then. So hopefully that will help you. Your brain is just learning how to quilt it in two different directions and connect it all together. It definitely will come with just a little bit of practice, so try not to be discouraged. I like the little help with the exclamation point. Help me. When learning feathers, do I recommend learning on a domestic before trying on the long arm? I think you should practice on the machine that you have. If you have a long arm, I think it's probably best to practice on your long arm. But if you, let's say you just got your long arm and you're not 100% comfortable with it and you want to learn on the sewing machine, that's fine too. I've had people say they've done it both ways. I think practicing on the machine that you're using is going to be the best option. But whatever you will do is what you should do. I definitely don't want you to feel like, oh, that's what she said. So whatever you want to work with. Would I change the color of the thread in the center where the border changes colors? Yes, and I actually did that because I'm a little extra like that. So in that center square, and we saw that half feather wrapped around where that fabric changes colors, I did change the thread as I went around. I just thought it was super cute. It's not required, and that's really why I didn't show it in the video or really close-up pictures of it, because I don't want you to be like, oh, now I have to change thread colors within that strip. That's not something that I do a lot. If I were quilting an actual quilt, I probably would just pick one color and go with it, especially in those ombre fabrics. But I was feeling kind of thready and ambitious, so I wanted to do that. All right, do we need to stitch in the ditch before we start quilting? No, you don't need to. It's totally up to you if you want to. I like to do it because I love the look of it. But if you don't like to do it, don't worry. It's not a requirement. It's not like it's going to change your quilting or anything. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, everybody, I'm going to be back again on Tuesday with another video. And I will see you in a few weeks during the live chat. So make sure you store up your questions for me or ask them on the video in the comments, and I get on there from time to time to answer it. I hope you all have fun with the next few videos. Until I see you guys, I hope you have happy quilting.